Caleb Monroe had it all: power, wealth, and the kind of influence that carved highways through opposition. But beneath the surface of his Houston empire lay a wound that never healed. 7 years ago, his wife vanished. His son disappeared, and the only evidence was a whisper of betrayal, and the shadow of a man he once trusted. Now, on a rainy street in Dallas, Caleb sees a boy being scolded for knocking over a fruit cart. Something about the child stops him cold. The curls, the eyes, the silence. As questions rise like oil to the surface, Caleb begins to uncover a conspiracy darker than he imagined. A web of lies, sabotage, and a murder that was never supposed to be solved. But this time, he won't bury the truth. He's not just fighting for answers. He's fighting for his son. Subscribe now for more emotional, powerful stories that unravel layer by layer and leave you breathless by the end. The wind off the Gulf carried the scent of salt and diesel, a haunting reminder of everything Caleb Monroe had lost. The private helicopter landed quietly at the Monroe oil compound near Galveston, its rotors slicing through the heavy silence that had settled over the crew since the explosion. Caleb stepped out, his boots hitting the landing pad with practiced authority, but there was a noticeable change in the way he carried himself. The weight of grief sat squarely on his broad shoulders. His younger brother, Micah, had been one of the 15 men reported missing after the offshore rig caught fire 3 nights ago. The flames had raged through steel and sea alike. Recovery efforts had turned into search and rescue missions, and then, by that morning, into quiet memorials. "Mr. Monroe," said David Reese, the site foreman, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "We found Micah's helmet, nothing else." Caleb nodded slowly, the motion stiff. "Show me." They walked the length of the pier in silence, passing stunned workers who lowered their heads respectfully as their CEO approached. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence had always been calm, commanding, never theatrical. But today, something raw flickered just beneath the surface. At the edge of the scorched dock, David handed Caleb a blackened hard hat. The initials MM were still faintly visible on the inside rim. Caleb's jaw clenched. He turned his face toward the sea, as if the horizon might offer closure. "Micah used to say the ocean talked to him," Caleb murmured. David swallowed hard. "He listened better than the rest of us." Caleb stayed there for several minutes, unmoving, before finally turning. "We'll honor him. All of them. I want full compensation for the families. No waiting. No red tape." "Yes, sir." Back in Houston, later that evening, the Monroe estate felt colder than usual. The sprawling property was a fortress of stone and glass, perfectly manicured, but hollow. Caleb poured himself a drink and stared into the fireplace he hadn't used in years. Grief, for Caleb, had always been a private affair. He didn't weep, he worked. That was the plan, until the doorbell rang. Standing on the front step was a woman in a deep green coat, soaked from the rain. She was slight, with sharp eyes and a jawline that spoke of quiet resolve. Her hair, long and damp, curled slightly at the ends. "I'm Isabella Cruz," she said, brushing hair from her face. "Dr. Isabella Cruz. You invited the Environmental Commission to your company's roundtable discussion, and then canceled it." Caleb blinked. "I did. You're the largest oil producer in Texas. Your rigs are leaking into habitats that haven't had a voice in decades. I'm here to give them one." It was the wrong night to make demands of him. Caleb opened his mouth to politely, firmly shut her down, but something in her eyes stopped him. Not pity, not arrogance. Conviction. He stepped back. "Come in, you're soaking." Inside, Isabella declined the towel he offered but accepted the bourbon. She took one sip and set the glass down, her eyes not leaving his face. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said gently. "I read about the explosion." Caleb looked away. "Thank you." But this isn't just about you, Mr. Monroe. Caleb, he corrected. She nodded. Caleb, people are dying on both sides of this fight. Your brother on a rig. Children near the Sabine wetlands from toxins in the water. It's all connected. You have a chance to change the way this industry works. He studied her in silence. Most people feared speaking that boldly in this house. You believe you can make me care about birds and wetlands, he said finally. I believe you already do, she replied calmly. But no one's asked you to prove it. A small, tired smile tugged at the edge of Caleb's mouth. You're fearless. No, just tired of watching people with power do nothing. Something about her, her voice, her clarity, her audacity, felt like a defibrillator to his frozen chest. For the first time in days, he felt something stir beneath the layers of grief. I'll reschedule the round table, he said. She raised a brow. You'll host it. He chuckled, the sound foreign even to himself. Yes, I will. As she turned to leave, Caleb found himself stepping forward. Wait. She turned. Dinner. Tomorrow. My place. You'll be the first environmental scientist to ever eat in this house. She hesitated, then smiled. Only if we talk about clean energy. Caleb nodded. Only if we eat brisket. She laughed softly. Deal. As she disappeared into the night, Caleb stood in the doorway for a long time. The pain of his brother's death still ached like a deep bruise, but now it sat beside something unexpected. Possibility. And, in that fragile, fleeting moment, Caleb Monroe finally shut the door, not on the woman, but on the grief that had threatened to consume him whole. Tomorrow, it would begin again. This time, differently. The scent of mesquite and rosemary filled the air as twilight settled over the Monroe estate. On the patio, the brisket Caleb had promised sizzled on the smoker, while a table was set with candles that flickered gently in the breeze. The view overlooked rolling Texas hills dotted with wildflowers, untouched by drills or development, land Caleb had never sold, for reasons he never explained. Isabella Cruz arrived just before 7, wearing a denim jacket and a floral dress that danced around her knees with every step. She carried a canvas folder of data and proposals, but her eyes lit up when she saw the dinner table. Is this a strategy to soften me up before I grill you on methane leaks? She teased. Caleb smiled from the grill. Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to feed the first person in years who challenged me without flinching. She tilted her head, measuring his tone. Well, I'm still going to ask hard questions. I expect nothing less. They sat as the sun dipped behind the hills. Over dinner, Isabella spoke with quiet intensity about cleaner technology, energy transition, and environmental justice. Caleb listened. Not out of obligation, but out of a growing admiration for how her mind worked. There was fire in her convictions, but also empathy. She didn't fight just to win. She fought to protect. By dessert, the conversation had shifted. Caleb poured her a glass of Cabernet as they lingered near the fireplace. Your brother, she said gently. You haven't spoken about him. Caleb looked down, swirling the wine in his glass. Micah was the heart of this family, of this company even. He believed in good people doing hard work, honest work. Isabella waited patiently. I keep thinking, if he'd taken the day off, if I'd told him to stay on shore. Caleb's voice cracked, but he cleared it quickly. I wasn't there. I was supposed to be. You're not a god, Caleb, she said softly. You can't control fire and steel and luck, but you can decide what you do next. He met her eyes. What would you do? I'd turn grief into something no one could ignore, build something bigger than regret. Their fingers brushed as she reached for her wine. Neither of them pulled away. That night didn't end with a kiss. It ended with two people sitting in silence by a fire, realizing they'd found something rare, connection born from truth, not performance. Weeks passed. Meetings became collaborations. Collaborations became shared laughter, and laughter eventually gave way to love. Caleb and Isabella became inseparable, not because they filled each other's silences, but because they understood them. When Isabella talked, Caleb listened as though each word mattered. And when Caleb finally spoke, Isabella heard what he didn't say. They married the following spring in a small ceremony beneath the cottonwoods near the old riverbed. No media, no spectacle, just 2 rings, 4 vows, and 1 quiet promise, to build a world their children would never have to apologize for inheriting. 6 months later, Isabella gave birth to a boy. They named him Liam. The day Liam was born, Caleb cried. Not when he first saw his son's tiny fists or when he counted the 10 perfect toes. He cried later, holding the sleeping newborn in his arms while Isabella rested. Liam's curly dark hair reminded him of her. His heartbeat, strong and insistent, felt like a second chance echoing in his chest. "You're gonna be better than me," he whispered to the boy. "You're gonna build something I couldn't even imagine." Liam stirred, then settled. Caleb kissed his forehead. Outside the hospital room, Derek Lancaster stood watching through the glass. Derek had worked under Caleb for over a decade, clawing his way into an executive seat. Always present, always polite. But behind his tailored suits and country club charm, Derek nursed a growing resentment. Caleb had everything: power, wealth, now love and legacy, and all Derek had was his name in someone else's shadow. "You see that?" Derek whispered to himself. "That's the beginning of your weakness." But no one noticed Derek leave the hospital floor that day. Not the nurse, not the secretary, not even Caleb, who, for the first time in years, had stopped watching his back. "Hey, the Monroe estate, baby." Liam brought a new kind of rhythm. His laugh was infectious, his cries oddly musical. Isabella would carry him into the garden every morning and talk to him about trees and bees and rivers, even though he couldn't understand a word. Caleb would watch them from his office window, a warmth growing in him that felt stronger than ambition ever had. He no longer cared about expansion for the sake of it. He started signing off on greener initiatives. He hired more women, more scientists. He pushed for safety reviews, not to avoid lawsuits, but to protect workers like Micah. But as Liam turned 3 and started stringing together sentences, Derek's envy bloomed like mold in the corners of the empire. He'd tried digging into Isabella's past. He'd hired investigators, ran background checks. Nothing scandalous, nothing he could twist. She was clean, respected, beloved. And that made her dangerous. Derek couldn't outshine Caleb in business, but he could wait. He could watch, and eventually he could find a crack to split their perfect world wide open. But for now, Caleb and Isabella danced barefoot in the living room while Liam played with blocks on the floor. The house wasn't just full of laughter. It was full of peace. And for a while, that was enough. The scent of mesquite and rosemary filled the air as twilight settled over the Monroe estate. On the patio, the brisket Caleb had promised sizzled on the smoker, while a table was set with candles that flickered gently in the breeze. The view overlooked rolling Texas hills dotted with wildflowers, untouched by drills or development, land Caleb had never sold, for reasons he never explained. Isabella Cruz arrived just before 7, wearing a denim jacket and a floral dress that danced around her knees with every step. She carried a canvas folder of data and proposals, but her eyes lit up when she saw the dinner table. "Is this a strategy to soften me up before I grill you on methane leaks?" she teased. Caleb smiled from the grill. "Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to feed the first person in years who challenged me without flinching." She tilted her head, measuring his tone. "Well, I'm still going to ask hard questions. I expect nothing less." They sat as the sun dipped behind the hills. Over dinner, Isabella spoke with quiet intensity about cleaner technology, energy transition, and environmental justice. Caleb listened, not out of obligation but out of a growing admiration for how her mind worked. There was fire in her convictions, but also empathy. She didn't fight just to win. She fought to protect. By dessert, the conversation had shifted. Caleb poured her a glass of Cabernet as they lingered near the fireplace. "Your brother," she said gently. "You haven't spoken about him." Caleb looked down, swirling the wine in his glass. Micah was the heart of this family, of this company even. He believed in good people doing hard work, honest work. Isabella waited patiently. "I keep thinking. If he'd taken the day off, if I'd told him to stay on shore." Caleb's voice cracked, but he cleared it quickly. "I wasn't there. I was supposed to be." "You're not a god, Caleb," she said softly. "You can't control fire and steel and luck, but you can decide what you do next." He met her eyes. "What would you do?" "I'd turn grief into something no one could ignore. Build something bigger than regret." Their fingers brushed as she reached for her wine. Neither of them pulled away. That night didn't end with a kiss. It ended with two people sitting in silence by a fire, realizing they'd found something rare. Connection born from truth, not performance. Weeks passed. Meetings became collaborations. Collaborations became shared laughter, and laughter eventually gave way to love. Caleb and Isabella became inseparable, not because they filled each other's silences, but because they understood them. When Isabella talked, Caleb listened as though each word mattered, and when Caleb finally spoke, Isabella heard what he didn't say. They married the following spring in a small ceremony beneath the cottonwoods near the old riverbed. No media, no spectacle, just 2 rings, 4 vows, and 1 quiet promise to build a world their children would never have to apologize for inheriting. 6 months later, Isabella gave birth to a boy. They named him Liam. The day Liam was born, Caleb cried. Not when he first saw his son's tiny fists or when he counted the 10 perfect toes. He cried later, holding the sleeping newborn in his arms while Isabella rested. Liam's curly dark hair reminded him of her. His heartbeat, strong and insistent, felt like a second chance echoing in his chest. "You're going to be better than me," he whispered to the boy. "You're going to build something I couldn't even imagine." Liam stirred, then settled. Caleb kissed his forehead. Outside the hospital room, Derek Lancaster stood watching through the glass. Derek had worked under Caleb for over a decade, clawing his way into an executive seat. Always present, always polite. But behind his tailored suits and country club charm, Derek nursed a growing resentment. Caleb had everything: power, wealth, now love and legacy. And all Derek had was his name in someone else's shadow. "You see that?" Derek whispered to himself. "That's the beginning of your weakness." But no one noticed Derek leave the hospital floor that day. Not the nurse, not the secretary, not even Caleb, who, for the first time in years, had stopped watching his back. At the Monroe estate, baby Liam brought a new kind of rhythm. His laugh was infectious, his cries oddly musical. Isabella would carry him into the garden every morning and talk to him about trees and bees and rivers, even though he couldn't understand a word. Caleb would watch them from his office window, a warmth growing in him that felt stronger than ambition ever had. He no longer cared about expansion for the sake of it. He started signing off on greener initiatives. He hired more women, more scientists. He pushed for safety reviews, not to avoid lawsuits but to protect workers like Micah. But as Liam turned 3 and started stringing together sentences, Derek's envy bloomed like mold in the corners of the empire. He'd tried digging into Isabella's past. He'd hired investigators, ran background checks. Nothing scandalous. Nothing he could twist. She was clean, respected, beloved. And that made her dangerous. Derek couldn't outshine Caleb in business, but he could wait, he could watch, and eventually he could find a crack to split their perfect world wide open. But for now, Caleb and Isabella danced barefoot in the living room while Liam played with blocks on the floor. The house wasn't just full of laughter. It was full of peace. And, for a while, that was enough. The summer air had a sweetness to it, honeysuckle and sun-drenched earth, as if Texas itself was at ease. Liam had just turned 4, and his laugh echoed through the halls of the Monroe estate like music. Isabella, barefoot in the kitchen, flipped pancakes while Liam tugged at her dress, asking questions about bees and thunderclouds. Caleb entered from the patio, dirt on his boots, cradling a tiny basil plant Liam had insisted they rescue from the greenhouse. "Mommy," Liam beamed, "we saved it." Isabella looked up, smiling warmly. "You've got a little dirt on your nose, Captain Green Thumb." "I'm helping Daddy save the planet," Liam declared proudly. Caleb ruffled his son's curls and kissed Isabella softly on the cheek. Breakfast smells like heaven. It was a morning like hundreds before, simple, golden, real, but none of them knew it would be the last. The first sign came at noon. Caleb returned from a meeting to find the kitchen empty, the pancakes still warm. Liam's sippy cup sat half full on the counter. Isabella's purse was gone, but her phone, her lifeline, was still on the entryway table. He called out, half playful, "Isa? Liam?" Silence. He checked the backyard, the greenhouse, upstairs, the nursery. Every step began to echo louder. Panic swelled in his chest, quiet and slow, like a rising tide. He called her phone, heard it ring from the foyer, no answer. By 1:15 p.m., Caleb had contacted security. By 3:00 p.m., every private guard on the property had been questioned. No one saw her leave. No one reported any visitors. No vehicles entered or exited since early morning. By 5:00 p.m., Caleb's voice was hoarse from shouting. His hands trembled as he stared at the footage. Grainy, incomplete, missing 2 crucial hours between 10:30 and 12:30. Derek appeared at his office door just as Caleb was about to throw the monitor across the room. "Something's not right," Caleb said, barely breathing. Derek raised an eyebrow, tone just the right balance of concern and restraint. "There's chatter." Caleb turned slowly. "About Isabella, about files, sensitive documents from R&D and policy proposals from the Clean Initiative, missing, pulled just days before her disappearance." "What the hell are you implying?" Caleb growled. "I'm not implying anything," Derek said coolly. "But the board is already whispering. Investors, too. If it gets out that she ran off with confidential company data..." Caleb slammed his fist on the desk. "She wouldn't." "I'm just telling you what others are saying," Derek replied, too calmly. "Get out." Derek lingered. "Just think about how it looks. No note, no signs of struggle. She's smart, Caleb. Maybe smarter than we gave her credit for." The door clicked shut behind him. Caleb stood there, stunned. 2 days later, the police opened an inquiry but not a full investigation. There was no sign of a break-in, no ransom, no struggle, no vehicle found, no credit card use, no eyewitnesses, just a mother and son vanishing like dust in the wind. A week later, a board member whispered to a journalist, and the first headline appeared: "Wife of Monroe Oil CEO suspected in eco-leak scandal." Caleb's phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, investors, lawyers, half of them demanded answers. The other half offered excuses not to ask questions. But Caleb said nothing. Not to the press, not to the board, not even to the world that expected him to condemn the woman he'd once called the love of his life. Because deep in his gut, he knew something was off. Isabella loved Liam with every molecule in her body. She wouldn't just disappear. She wouldn't leave behind his favorite blanket. She wouldn't abandon her garden. She wouldn't leave Caleb without a word. Unless she couldn't. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The estate became too quiet. Caleb stopped opening Liam's bedroom door. The toys, the drawings, the tiny shoes, they remained where they were last left, as if untouched time could somehow preserve a clue. Isabella's ring stayed in his coat pocket. He held it sometimes, late at night, when no one was watching. He reviewed security footage endlessly, searching for gaps, faces, mistakes, hired every investigator in the state, called in favors, ran silent searches in counties he'd never heard of. Nothing. And still, he refused to speak a word to the public. Because if he spoke, it would make the story real, final, irreversible. And he wasn't ready for that. On the first anniversary of their disappearance, Caleb walked to the greenhouse unwatered for months. Weeds had overtaken the herbs. The basil Liam planted had wilted to dust. He knelt anyway. "Where are you?" he whispered into the earth. Somewhere behind the horizon, a child with curls laughed quietly. Somewhere across town, a truth lay buried, wrapped in lies, forged documents, and greed. And somewhere in a high-rise suite, Derek raised a glass of scotch to the night sky, a smug smile twitching at his lips. "It begins," he murmured. But even Derek didn't know. Caleb Monroe was still watching, still waiting, still searching, and he would not rest until he unearthed every piece of the truth, no matter what it cost. The Monroe estate had grown quieter with each passing season. What was once a home filled with laughter, muddy boots, and bedtime songs had turned into a monument of stillness, marble floors echoing only the sound of solitude. Caleb moved through it like a ghost in his own life. He had aged, not drastically, but noticeably. The confident swagger that once defined him had been traded for a kind of weary poise, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes always scanning for something not there. His mornings began with black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and ended with neat bourbon and silence. 7 years. 7 birthdays missed. 7 Christmas mornings without wrapping paper chaos. 7 years without the warmth of Isabella's hand brushing against his in the kitchen. Every room still held shadows of them. Liam's artwork remained taped to the wall in the hallway. Faded crayon suns, smiling stick figures labeled Mom and Dad. The greenhouse had been restored but never touched. Isabella's favorite chair still faced the west windows at sunset, the cushion slightly indented. And in his coat pocket, still there every day, was her wedding ring, small, elegant, warm from his touch. The world hadn't waited for him to heal. It spun on, ruthless and indifferent. Derek, meanwhile, had risen quietly through the ranks at Monroe Oil. He didn't overreach, at least not in ways that could be proven. He was smart, subtle, and utterly without conscience. "He's tightening his grip," Tom, Caleb's oldest friend and now COO, warned during a late boardroom meeting. "I let him," Caleb replied, not with bitterness, but exhaustion. Tom leaned forward. "You're still CEO, Caleb, but you're giving him more ground every quarter. The board's getting restless." "I don't care about the board," Caleb muttered, standing and walking to the window. Houston's skyline glowed in the distance, so vibrant, so alive, so unlike him. Tom hesitated, then gently asked, "And what about you? What do you care about?" Caleb didn't answer. Because he didn't know any more. By the 5th year, most people stopped asking about Isabella and Liam. The media had moved on, branding it a tragic mystery in anniversary specials and half-hearted exposés. Caleb never responded to interviews, never confirmed, never denied, never shared the sleepless nights or the dreams that still woke him in cold sweats, Liam calling for him in the dark, Isabella reaching out through flames. He had spent millions on private investigators, all dead ends. He had interrogated the tech teams about the missing footage, pressed legal teams to scour internal emails for signs of sabotage. But Derek had always stayed clean, at least on paper. Now, Caleb did what he always did. He worked. He rebuilt a refinery in Corpus Christi. He funded solar research in West Texas, something Isabella once dreamed of. He made money, stacks of it, but none of it mattered. Not really. He turned to 39 and didn't notice. Tom hosted a quiet dinner, 3 old friends, some scotch, and half-hearted toasts. "You ever think about starting over?" Tom asked, swirling his drink. "Every day," Caleb replied. "But not with someone new, just with them." Tom said nothing after that. There wasn't anything left to say. At the start of the 7th year, Caleb stopped sleeping in his master bedroom. It was too big, too empty. Instead, he moved into the guest suite down the hall, the one Isabella decorated when Liam was a baby, walls painted soft blue, bookshelves still lined with bedtime stories and parenting guides. Sometimes, late at night, Caleb sat in Liam's tiny rocking chair, knees pulled up awkwardly, just breathing in the room. It still smelled faintly like lavender and baby powder, even after all this time. He never opened the closet. Not once. Then, one cold October morning, something changed. Caleb was reading an article buried in the back of a regional newspaper about a community garden project in Dallas. A blurry photo caught his attention, not the story, the children in it. Specifically, one child. Curly hair, slight, serious face, something in the posture, the way he held a watering can like it was a sword. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He stood, walked to his study, and magnified the photo on his computer. The boy was 7. Exactly. He didn't call security. He didn't tell Tom. He didn't hire a new investigator. He packed a bag. He went himself. The journey to Dallas felt like driving into a memory. The weather was the same as it had been the day Isabella disappeared. Blue sky, wisps of wind, just enough sun to sting. Caleb stayed in an anonymous rental car, baseball cap pulled low. He parked across from the address listed in the article, an old church-turned-shelter. He waited. An hour passed, then 2. And then he saw him. The boy from the photo, lugging a bucket of recyclables, trailed by 2 younger kids. They bickered, laughed, chased each other. Caleb's breath hitched. The boy turned. Their eyes met, just for a second. Those eyes. Isabella's and his. Caleb clutched the steering wheel with trembling hands. He didn't know what would come next, didn't know what the truth would cost. But for the first time in 7 years, something alive stirred inside him. The next morning, Caleb parked in the same spot, an aging, church-turned-shelter tucked between boarded-up storefronts and crumbling sidewalks. He didn't sleep, couldn't. He'd sat in that rental car most of the night, replaying every second of what he saw. Now he was here, waiting, watching. It wasn't long before he saw the boy again, Liam, though Caleb hadn't yet heard his name spoken aloud. The child wore the same faded red hoodie and carried a small satchel over one shoulder. 2 other children followed him, Caleb watched as they made their way to a corner convenience store with a bin of recyclables. Then, it happened. A loud scolding erupted just outside the store. Caleb's eyes snapped to the scene. The store owner, a wiry man with a sun-worn face, was standing over Liam, pointing an angry finger. "I told you last week, kid. You can't just take stuff out back without permission." Liam tried to explain, his voice soft but firm. "We were just cleaning up the alley. I thought—" "You thought wrong," the man barked, snatching the bag from his hands and tossing it aside. Caleb's instincts ignited. He was out of the car and across the street before he had time to second-guess himself. "Hey!" Caleb's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough." The man turned, startled. "Who the hell are you?" Caleb stepped between him and the child. Someone who doesn't like bullies yelling at kids for trying to help. The man blinked, caught off guard. He's a child. You want to file a complaint. Take it up with the shelter. Don't throw trash at his feet and call it discipline." The store owner scowled but backed off, mumbling as he turned away. Caleb knelt beside the boy, who stared at him warily, his body still tense. "Are you okay?" Caleb asked gently. Liam gave a slow, guarded nod. "Yeah. Thank you, mister." Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The curve of his mouth, his nose, those eyes, his and Isabella's. It wasn't just genetics. It was something deeper, an energy, a presence, a quiet kind of bravery. "What's your name?" Caleb asked, even though part of him already knew. "Liam," he replied softly, clutching the satchel. Caleb's heart dropped. He masked it with a tight smile. "That's a strong name. You live at the shelter?" Liam hesitated, glancing toward his friends, two younger kids now staring from the corner with wide eyes. "Yeah," he finally said. "With Miss Carroll. She runs things." Caleb stood, his mind racing. He needed to keep this simple, safe. If he pushed too hard, he'd lose the moment. "Well, Liam, thank you for cleaning up the alley. You were just trying to help." The boy blinked, confused by the kindness. "Most people don't care." "I do," Caleb said softly, "more than you know." He turned to leave, but Liam's voice stopped him. "Wait." Caleb looked back, heart pounding. "You're not from around here, are you?" the boy asked. "No," Caleb admitted, his voice slightly hoarse. "But I think maybe I've been away too long." Liam gave a small nod, as if that explained everything. Then he turned, collected the scattered recyclables, and led his friends back toward the shelter. Caleb stood rooted on the sidewalk, watching them disappear around the corner. Later that evening, he sat in a diner 3 blocks away, a lukewarm coffee growing cold in front of him. He didn't touch it. He just stared out the window, his reflection barely visible in the glass, Liam. He hadn't heard that name in nearly 7 years, but Isabella had chosen it. He remembered the night they decided, curled in bed, her belly round with life. "Liam," she'd whispered, smiling, strong but soft, just like I hope he'll be. Caleb ran a hand over his face. His mind buzzed with questions. Where had Isabella been hiding? Why this shelter? What happened to her? And then a terrifying thought pierced through him. What if she wasn't hiding? What if she was gone? No, he couldn't think that. Not yet. He had to know the truth. And more than that, he had to protect Liam. Whoever had taken Isabella from their lives, if someone had, they might not be done. And if Derek was involved in any way, Caleb reached for his phone and called Tom. "You're alive," Tom said wryly. "You vanished for 2 days, and I'm left holding a board meeting with Derek, practically salivating." "I need a favor," Caleb said, his tone sharp. Tom's voice changed instantly. "Say the word." "There's a shelter in South Dallas. Used to be a church. Get me everything on it. Ownership records, donations, past volunteers, anything connected to it in the last 7 years. Tom didn't question. You think this is about her? I don't know, Caleb whispered, but I think... I found my son. A beat of stunned silence followed. Then Tom replied quietly, I'm on it. Caleb hung up and looked out the window once more. He didn't know what answers tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in years, he wasn't chasing ghosts. He was chasing truth. And this time, he wouldn't stop. The next morning, Caleb returned to the shelter street before dawn, the air still thick with early fog. He parked a block away, heart pounding, nerves taut. Sleep had been a suggestion, not a reality. Images of Liam's face kept flooding his thoughts. Those familiar eyes, the curl of his hair, even the way he squared his shoulders, just like Isabella used to do when she was bracing herself for something. He couldn't shake it. Today, he had to know. The shelter was already stirring with morning life. Women carrying toddlers, volunteers unloading supplies, the scent of burnt toast wafting through cracked windows. Caleb kept to the edge of the sidewalk, hood drawn low, watching from across the street. He knew shadows better than he liked to admit. Being invisible came easily to a man who once had the world's attention, but not a single person to share it with. Then he saw him, Liam. The boy emerged from the side door, carrying a plastic tub filled with coloring books and construction paper. He paused at the steps, adjusting the strap on his backpack. Just behind him, a volunteer, an older woman with graying braids, called out something about school breakfast. Liam nodded, then turned the corner toward a nearby community center. Caleb followed at a distance, his steps measured, his chest heavy. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something ancient, protective, primal. Liam dropped a small notebook just outside the center's door. Caleb stepped forward instinctively, stooping to retrieve it. He froze as he opened it to the first page. My name is Liam Cruz. I'm in 2nd grade. I like space and dinosaurs and drawing. My mom said I have the biggest heart in the world. Cruz. The name cracked something wide open in Caleb's chest. Isabella had kept her name and given it to Liam. He clutched the notebook like a sacred text, eyes stinging. She never erased him. Inside the notebook were drawings. Crayon sketches of spaceships, a smiling sun, a house with 4 windows. One page near the back nearly buckled his knees. It was a drawing of a woman, chestnut hair, green eyes, and a man with dark features, tall, arms wide open. Between them, a boy with a red hoodie. Underneath, written in a child's uneven hand, "This is my dad. I don't know him, but Mom said he would have loved me." Caleb's throat tightened. He had to sit down. He found a bench near the playground, the notebook still open in his lap, his hands trembling. She told him. Even after everything, Isabella told Liam about him. I should have been there, he whispered aloud, the weight of 7 lost years crashing down like a flood. I should have fought harder. Suddenly, a voice interrupted his spiral. You're holding my notebook. Caleb looked up into the wide, uncertain eyes of Liam, standing a few feet away, his expression cautious but not fearful. I was going to return it, Caleb said, his voice steadying. You dropped it at the door. Liam nodded, stepping forward slowly. You read it? Caleb hesitated, then answered honestly, Some of it, yes. I didn't mean to invade your privacy. I just saw your name and Cruz, your mother's name. Liam's eyes narrowed with a question. You knew my mom? Caleb swallowed hard, every word he'd rehearsed overnight vanishing into the morning mist. Yes, a long time ago. Liam blinked. She's gone. I know, Caleb said quietly, his voice thick. I'm sorry. The boy stood silently, his small face unreadable. Then, without warning, he sat beside Caleb on the bench and looked out at the playground. Most people pretend like they didn't hear me when I say that, but you didn't. Caleb nodded, his voice trembling, because I didn't want to pretend. She was someone important to me. After a long silence, Liam reached out and gently took the notebook from Caleb's lap. He flipped through the pages until he found the drawing of the man, the woman, and the boy. "That's my mom," he said, pointing. "And that's the dad, I imagine. Sometimes I dream about him. I don't know what he looks like." Caleb blinked back tears, barely managing to say, "He looks a lot like you." Liam smiled faintly, but the sadness in his eyes lingered. "I wish she was still here," he whispered. "She always made things feel okay, even when we didn't have money for heat or when she was sick." Caleb inhaled shakily. "Do you remember how she got sick?" Liam nodded slowly. "A man in a truck hit us one night when she was walking me home. We were supposed to cross the street, but the light wasn't working. He didn't even stop. I wasn't hurt too bad. But she—" His voice broke off. Caleb closed his eyes, fury tightening in his chest. "That shouldn't have happened. It wasn't your fault." Liam looked up. "Miss Carroll says bad people get what's coming, but she says sometimes it takes a while." Caleb nodded solemnly. "She's right." Liam turned back to his drawing, then looked at Caleb more directly. "Are you a bad person?" he asked quietly. The question hit like a hammer to the ribs. "No," Caleb said slowly, painfully, "but I've made mistakes I'm trying to make right." The bell from the center chimed. Liam stood up, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "Thanks for giving this back," he said, holding up the notebook. "You can sit here again if you want. It's a good thinking spot." As he walked away, Caleb whispered, "I'll be back." He didn't know exactly how the pieces would fit together, but one thing was clear. The boy was his, and someone had taken everything from him. Now, he was going to find out who and why. The next day came cloaked in a gray, overcast sky that matched Caleb Monroe's mood. For the first time in years, he'd skipped his morning executive briefing. He couldn't sit through another soulless conference call pretending that revenue forecasts mattered more than a child's life. Instead, he returned to the playground bench just before school let out, the same bench where Liam had shared pieces of his world, small, fragile pieces that had cut Caleb more deeply than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He was early, too early. But he needed the quiet, the space to process the wave of emotion that had gripped him since reading Liam's notebook. The drawing, the name Cruz, the child's quiet ache, all of it had awakened something he didn't know he still had: hope. Footsteps echoed down the sidewalk. Liam approached with hesitant steps, his red hoodie pulled tight over his curls. He clutched a paper bag lunch that looked barely touched. "I saved the apple for you," he said, extending the fruit. Caleb blinked, caught off guard by the gesture. "Thank you, Liam." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of distant traffic filling the spaces between them. "Miss Carroll said I could talk to you again," Liam offered. "She said you seemed safe. Sad, but safe." Caleb chuckled softly, the sound carrying weariness. "She's right on both counts." Liam kicked at a pebble with his sneaker. "You said you knew my mom. What was she like when you met her?" Caleb's gaze drifted to the cloudy sky. "She was fierce. The kind of woman who didn't let anyone tell her who to be. Your mom. She lit up every room she walked into, even if she didn't try. She believed in protecting the world, and she never backed down." Liam nodded as if confirming what he already knew. "She said we were a team, even when she got really tired." A painful lump rose in Caleb's throat. He had to ask, "Do you remember when she got sick?" Liam looked down at his hands. "It wasn't sickness. It was the accident. The truck," Caleb whispered. Liam nodded slowly. It happened after we moved into the shelter. Mom used to work late shifts cleaning buildings. One night, we were walking home and this big truck ran the light. She pushed me out of the way, but it hit her. Caleb's heart stopped. She saved you. She always did, Liam replied, voice thin. Did they catch the driver? Liam shook his head. No. The police said the plate number was smeared. They told Miss Carroll it was probably just a random hit and run. Caleb's mind raced. Isabella always walked cautiously, always looked twice at every crossing. For her to be caught off guard? It didn't add up, not unless it wasn't an accident. He swallowed the bitter thought and focused on Liam. What happened after? Liam rubbed his eyes. They said Mom died on the way to the hospital. Miss Carroll took me in that night. I didn't talk much for a while. Caleb clenched his fists, pain and fury fighting for space in his chest. You were so young. You should have never had to go through that. Liam looked at him then, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I think she knew something bad was going to happen. She started giving me little notes. They were in my lunchbox or under my pillow. She'd write things like, "Be strong for both of us," or "You've got more heart than any man I've ever known." Caleb exhaled shakily. Isabella. Always thinking ahead, even in fear, leaving pieces of herself behind to guide her son. I miss her every day, Liam said, brushing the sleeve of his hoodie across his cheek. But Miss Carroll says the people we love are never really gone. Not if we remember them. Caleb closed his eyes. She's right. After a long silence, Liam asked, Do you have kids? The question stole Caleb's breath. I didn't think I did, he replied truthfully. But now, I don't know. Liam stared at him. You said my mom was important to you. Were you guys friends? Caleb hesitated, then nodded. More than friends. Liam looked down. I wish I had a dad. I always thought maybe he was out there. Maybe he'd find me one day. Caleb felt tears pressing behind his eyes, hot and unrelenting. He reached out slowly and rested his hand on Liam's shoulder. I'm here now, he said softly. Liam blinked. Why now? Because sometimes people make mistakes, big ones. And sometimes it takes seeing someone again to realize what they lost. But once they know, they do everything in their power to never let go again. Liam studied him in silence. Then, with childlike bravery, he asked, If you are my dad, are you going to leave again? Caleb's voice cracked as he whispered, Never. From across the street, a black SUV idled longer than normal before pulling away slowly. Caleb noticed. He didn't like it. Something told him that their time in the shadows was over. The city lights blurred outside the car window as Caleb rode silently through Houston's midtown, his thoughts a tornado of rage, grief, and determination. Liam's words haunted him. Isabella died in a truck accident. No suspects, no justice, no closure. But Caleb had seen too much in the oil industry to believe in coincidences, especially not with Derek Slater still clinging to power at Monroe Energy like a parasite. Caleb reached for his phone and called the one person he knew would follow the truth, no matter where it led. Ramos Investigations, the voice on the other end answered crisply. Luis, it's Caleb Monroe. A pause. You're a hard man to reach these days. I need you, Caleb said plainly. Off the books, fast, quiet. There was another beat of silence. This about Isabella Cruz? Caleb's stomach twisted. How'd you know? I read the obituary. No funeral, no family, just a line about a tragic pedestrian accident. I thought it didn't smell right. It didn't, Caleb growled. I want everything. Traffic cams, police reports, EMS logs, any trucks in the area that night, especially company-owned. You think this was targeted? I think it was murder, Caleb replied, and I think Derek Slater had everything to gain. Luis exhaled through his nose. "Give me 72 hours. Make it 48. I'll call you when I have something." Caleb ended the call and leaned back against the leather seat, his jaw clenched tightly. Across from him, Liam had fallen asleep, his head resting against the window, curly hair haloed in the dashboard light. Caleb studied him, his child, the living echo of a woman who had tried to warn him and whom he had failed to protect. It wouldn't happen again. By morning, Luis had already uncovered the original police report. Caleb's eyes scanned the document in his home office, heart pounding as he noted the inconsistencies. No witness statements? The surveillance cam was inoperable that night? EMS arrived after a delayed dispatch due to a system error? He shoved the papers aside. Luis's voice came through his speakerphone, tight with concern. "And there's more. I dug into Derek's personal accounts. Guess what? 2 weeks before the crash, he made a sizable cash withdrawal, $50,000. The exact same day, a known contract fixer flew into Houston from San Diego." Caleb's hand went numb. "Name's Ronnie Keene, small-time enforcer. Used to run accident setups for insurance fraud. Quiet. Leaves no trail. Does this Ronnie have a record? Arrests, no convictions. And he vanished a month after Isabella's death." "Find him," Caleb said through gritted teeth. "I want him found." Luis hesitated. "You sure you want to know what else I might find?" Caleb stared out the window at the vast skyline his empire helped build. "I'd rather face the truth than live another day in the lie Derek built." That night, Caleb sat Liam down at the kitchen table in the apartment he'd rented near the shelter. The boy played with the corner of a napkin, glancing up with curious, cautious eyes. "I need to ask you something," Caleb said gently, "about the night your mom passed." Liam nodded slowly. "Okay. Did she seem worried that day? Like she knew something wasn't right?" Liam's face darkened. "She was scared. She told me not to walk alone that week. Said she felt someone was watching us." Caleb's heart sank. "She even had Miss Carroll walk me to school. Did she ever say who?" "No, but she kept looking over her shoulder, and that night—" She was holding my hand tighter than usual. Caleb reached out and gently took Liam's hand. "I'm going to find out who did this to her." Liam met his eyes, solemn and unwavering. "Promise?" "I promise," Caleb said fiercely. "And when I do, they'll never hurt anyone again." Just then, his phone buzzed. It was Luis. "I found Keene," Luis said. "He's holed up in a motel outside Galveston. You want me to go?" "No," Caleb said, rising. "I'm coming." Later that night, under the yellow flicker of a broken motel sign, Caleb stood face to face with the man who had taken Isabella from him. Keene was older now, heavier, his eyes bloodshot and wary. But the moment Caleb mentioned Isabella Cruz, the man stiffened. "I didn't know her," Keene said quickly. "But you killed her," Caleb replied icily. Keene's lips twitched. "I don't know what you're talking about." Caleb slammed a photo on the table. Security footage Luis had finally pulled from a bank cam 2 blocks from the crash. It showed Keene behind the wheel of a delivery truck, time-stamped the night Isabella died. "You ran her down, and I'm guessing someone paid you to make sure she didn't get up." Keene looked away, trembling. "You talk, now," Caleb said darkly, "or I make one call and your face is plastered across every news station in Texas by morning. Let's see how long you last in general population with a child killer reputation." Keene swallowed hard, sweat forming on his temples. "It wasn't supposed to be lethal," he croaked. "Just a scare. Spook her, maybe break a leg. Not kill, I swear. The money came from an offshore account. I was told she was a threat to a strategic interest." "And the client's name?" Keene paused, then mumbled, "D. Slater." Caleb stood frozen. Derek. The man he had once called his second-in-command. The man who sat at his boardroom table. Had murdered the woman Caleb loved, and would have taken Liam too, if fate hadn't intervened. Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides. The war had just begun. The air was still thick with tension as Caleb Monroe drove back toward Houston, the confession from Ronnie Keene playing on repeat in his mind. Derek Slater. It had been Derek all along. The betrayal burned deeper than anything Caleb had ever felt, hotter than oil fire, colder than the nights he spent alone after Isabella vanished. Back at his penthouse, the skyline of Houston glittered indifferently, but the world Caleb had known no longer looked the same. Luis was already waiting in the living room, a thick folder resting on his lap. "You're not going to like this," he said without preamble, handing it over. Caleb opened the folder slowly. Inside were financial records, internal memos, even encrypted emails that Luis had decrypted, every piece of it linking Derek to a shell company used to transfer the $50,000 payment to Keene. But what made Caleb's hand tremble was a printed hospital intake form, one he hadn't seen before. He read it once, then again, and then a third time, his heart pounding louder each moment. "You okay?" Luis asked cautiously. Caleb's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Liam wasn't supposed to be with Isabella that night." "What?" Isabella had signed him up for a school science night. Extended hours. It was her way of giving him something normal. Luis leaned in. "You're saying they planned the hit, not knowing Liam wouldn't be in the truck with her." The room fell into heavy silence. Caleb slowly sat down, the realization landing like a weight across his shoulders. "He would have died," he said hoarsely. "He would have died if she hadn't put him in that school program. Derek tried to kill my entire family." Luis rubbed his jaw. "We need to go to the authorities, right now." "No!" Caleb's eyes narrowed, filled with quiet, seething resolve. "Not yet. We need one more thing. A final nail. Derek's unraveling. Let's let him panic. When he moves again, we catch him in the act." Luis gave a slow nod. "You want bait?" "No," Caleb said, his voice soft but dangerous. "I have something better." 2 days later, Caleb sat on the bench at the modest playground near Liam's shelter. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement as Liam climbed the monkey bars with another boy. Caleb's eyes scanned the area. Ruth Abernathy, the shelter's guardian, sat nearby pretending to read a book, her phone live streaming to Luis's laptop. Hidden across the street, Luis watched the feed, his camera ready. "He's being watched," Luis whispered through Caleb's earpiece. "Dark sedan, tinted windows. Same one from last week. Could be Derek's." Caleb tensed. "Let's see if he bites." Minutes passed. Liam's laughter echoed across the yard, a sound that warmed Caleb's heart even as a fear gnawed at his spine. Then a man emerged from the sedan. Dark clothes, hooded, sunglasses, walking too fast. Luis's voice snapped in. "That's one of Derek's hired guys. I've seen him before in Galveston, with Keene." Caleb moved, subtly but deliberately, intercepting the man near the fence. "Going somewhere?" he asked coolly. The man froze, then turned, running. But he didn't get far. From behind the shelter, Luis tackled him to the ground while 2 of Caleb's private security agents swarmed in. They dragged the man back toward Caleb, where he finally dropped the act. "I was just delivering a message," he said defensively. "To a 7-year-old?" Caleb snapped. The man shrugged. "Boss said, bring him in, keep it clean." Luis sneered. "Clean's not going to help you now. You're going to jail for attempted kidnapping, and worse." Caleb leaned in, his voice low and lethal. "Tell Derek if he wants a war. He just started one." That night, Caleb handed over every piece of evidence to the district attorney. The video of Keene's confession, the financial records, the attempted abduction, the false accusations made about Isabella. Justice would no longer be a whispered hope. It would be a storm. Later, at the shelter, Caleb sat on Liam's bed as the boy drew pictures in a worn notebook. "You know," Liam said, his voice soft, "Mom used to say that when it rained too hard, it was because heaven was crying." Caleb smiled gently. She was right. Sometimes the sky just needs to let it out. Liam paused. "You're not leaving, are you?" "No, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." Liam handed him the notebook. On the last page was a crayon drawing of 3 figures, Caleb, Liam, and Isabella, with a sun shining overhead. "I added you," Liam said quietly. Caleb couldn't speak. He just pulled his son into his arms, holding him tightly. Outside, thunder rolled through the Texas sky, but inside, a new light was forming, a quiet promise that the storm would soon break. The wind howled across the Trinity River as dusk painted Dallas in bruised purples and burnt orange. Caleb stood on the rooftop of his downtown office, the city pulsing beneath him, yet all he could think of was Liam, his son. The boy had laughed that morning, genuinely laughed, as they ate cereal from mismatched bowls in Ruth Abernathy's cluttered kitchen. Caleb had watched him with quiet awe, like someone afraid that blinking too long would make it all disappear. But the warmth of that moment had faded quickly. Luis had intercepted a burner phone text. Short, chilling. "Tonight. Get the kid. Fast." Derek's last play had begun. Luis stood behind him now, breath visible in the cold. "We have teams posted at every shelter entrance. If they move on Liam, we'll see them coming." Caleb's jaw clenched. "I don't want us to just see them. I want them caught, red-handed, no escape routes, no lawyers." Luis nodded grimly. "They'll have nowhere to run." Meanwhile, across the city, Derek Slater paced his high-rise penthouse like a man unraveling. The once polished executive looked frayed, shirt unbuttoned, tie hanging loose, drink trembling in hand. "You were supposed to handle this," he barked into his phone. The voice on the other end, controlled, calculated, replied, "Your guy got tackled. They've turned it over to the DA. You're compromised." Derek slammed his glass into the wall, shattering it. "Then we finish this. No witnesses, no kid, no leverage left." The silence that followed was heavier than any threat. "Consider this your last favor," the voice said coldly. "Then we're done." Back at the shelter, Liam sat in a small reading circle. His eyes flicked toward the door every so often, just in case. Caleb sat nearby with Ruth, quietly sipping from a thermos of burnt coffee. "He's been drawing less," Ruth said softly. Caleb looked up. "That bad?" She nodded. He used to fill pages with stories and pictures. Now he waits, watches, like he's holding his breath. Caleb's throat tightened. No child should ever learn that kind of patience. Suddenly, Luis's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Black SUV just past the south alley. It circled twice. Lights off." Caleb rose instantly. "Let's move." They exited through the back, 2 plainclothes guards flanking the doors. Another car idled at the corner. Inside, the man behind the wheel watched the shelter windows. "We go in quiet," he murmured to his partner. "Grab the boy, head west." His partner hesitated. "It's risky. We don't know who's inside." "We've got 10 minutes, Max. Orders came from the top. Move." As they stepped from the vehicle, flashlights cut through the darkness. "Freeze!" shouted Luis from behind a dumpster. The men bolted. Chaos erupted. Shouts, scuffling shoes, a chase under flickering street lamps. One suspect jumped a fence. The other sprinted toward the shelter. Caleb tackled him before he could reach the door, the 2 men crashing to the pavement with bone-jarring force. The man fought back viciously, throwing elbows, teeth bared like a wild animal. But Caleb, fueled by something primal, rage, love, sheer terror, held tight. "You don't touch him," he growled, pinning the man's arm until he heard a sickening crack. Police sirens wailed in the distance as Luis caught the second man. They were handcuffed within minutes. "Who sent you?" Caleb barked. The man spat blood. "You already know." An hour later, Caleb stood outside the police precinct watching officers escort the two men inside. Luis leaned against the cruiser, arms crossed. "They'll flip," Luis said. "Derek's name will be on record by sunrise." Caleb exhaled, every muscle aching. "And Liam?" "He's fine. Ruth's reading him a bedtime story." The exhaustion hit him like a wave. But so did something else. Relief. Real, bone-deep relief. At the shelter, Liam was waiting with eyes wide open. "Are you okay?" he asked, running to Caleb the moment he stepped through the door. Caleb knelt, scooping him up. "I am now." Liam clung to him tightly, whispering, "I thought maybe you'd leave." Caleb's heart broke anew. Never again. Not in a million years. He walked the boy to bed, tucking the blanket up to Liam's chin. "Can I stay with you forever?" Liam asked, voice barely audible. Caleb swallowed hard. "I want that more than anything." From the doorway, Ruth wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice soft. "Then maybe it's time we talk adoption." Caleb turned, surprised. "You'd let me?" "He's already yours," she said warmly. "Paperwork's just the formality." That night, Caleb didn't return to his penthouse. He stayed on the cot next to Liam's bed, listening to his son breathe peacefully for the first time in weeks. Outside, the cold Texas night finally gave way to a calm sunrise, soft, hopeful, and quiet. The sun had barely crested over the Houston skyline when Caleb Monroe walked into the Harris County Courthouse, flanked by his legal team and Louise. He wasn't dressed in his usual tailored suit. Today, he wore a simple dark blazer over an open-collared shirt. Less CEO, more father. The kind of man who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to protect. The hallway echoed with soft footsteps and whispered speculation. Reporters hovered outside, but Caleb had issued no statements. Not yet. The story would be told, on his terms, when the time was right. Inside Conference Room C, Derek Slater sat at the head of the table like he still owned something. But his eyes darted too quickly, his fingers twitched against a styrofoam cup of cheap coffee, and the polished arrogance that once coated his words had dulled into something brittle. He looked up when Caleb entered, smiled thinly. "Well, this is familiar. You storm in, thinking you're saving the day." Caleb didn't sit. He dropped a thick manila folder onto the table with a dull thud. Derek's smirk faltered. "That's everything," Caleb said, his voice calm but edged with restrained fury. "Phone records, financial transactions, eyewitness testimony, GPS logs, the burner phone you used to order the hit on my son." Derek leaned back, scoffing. "You really think this will stick?" Louise stepped forward, placing a second folder beside the first, this one from the district attorney's office. "It already has," Louise said flatly. "Grand jury convenes tomorrow." Derek's expression twisted, lips twitching between mockery and something closer to panic. "You're bluffing." Caleb stepped in closer, his voice low and devastatingly steady. "You orchestrated Isabella's death. You framed her as a traitor to this company. You left a child to rot in shelters while you siphoned money and power behind my back. You tried to steal my son's future, and now I'm taking yours." Derek stood up fast, chair clattering behind him. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think anyone cares about your sad little comeback story?" "No," Caleb replied, "but I do." He slid one more document across the table. Derek blinked down at it, a resignation letter, with his signature already forged from previous filings Caleb had access to. You'll be stepping down from Monroe Energy effective immediately. You'll make no public statements. You'll agree to full cooperation with the district attorney, or we prosecute you for corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, and child endangerment." Derek's mouth opened, then closed again. His hands shook slightly. "And if I don't?" he said, though the question carried no weight anymore. "Then you'll be remembered not as a businessman, but as a coward who tried to kill a child to keep his secrets buried." For the first time in his life, Derek Slater looked afraid. Luis opened the door. Two plainclothes officers entered without a word and placed Derek under arrest. Caleb didn't watch as they cuffed him. He only turned when Luis gently touched his arm. "It's done," Luis said quietly, but Caleb shook his head. "Not yet." Later that afternoon, back at the shelter, Caleb found Liam sitting on the floor with crayons scattered around him. He was drawing trees, big ones, with strong roots. "Hey," Caleb said gently, kneeling beside him. "What you working on?" Liam held up the picture. "It's a forest. I've never been to one, have you?" "I have," Caleb said with a faint smile. "They're quieter than cities. Stronger, too. Just like you." Liam considered that, then reached for a green crayon. "Can we go sometime?" Caleb nodded, the answer already formed in his chest. "Yeah, buddy. We'll go soon." Ruth appeared in the doorway, smiling as she watched them. "The adoption papers are ready," she said softly. Caleb looked up, heart hammering in his chest. "I want you to be absolutely sure," Ruth continued. "Liam's been through enough change." "I've never been more certain of anything," Caleb replied. They signed the paperwork that evening, ink meeting paper with the finality of truth. No ceremony, no fanfare. The breeze that swept through the Texas countryside was soft and warm, carrying the scent of wild sage and sun-baked earth. It drifted over the green hills that framed the Cruz Monroe Environmental Preserve, land once surveyed for drilling, now reborn with life. Children ran between rows of oak saplings, their laughter echoing across the field like wind chimes. At the center of it all stood Caleb Monroe, a man transformed. His hands, once known only for signing multi-million-dollar contracts, now helped a boy tie his shoelaces near a wooden trail sign marked the Isabella Grove. "You okay, Liam?" Caleb asked, brushing dirt from the boy's jeans. Liam looked up and nodded with a grin, his curls damp with sweat. "Yeah, Dad. Just needed a break. We planted a lot." "You sure did," Caleb chuckled. 50 trees. That's a new record." Liam's face beamed with pride, and the sight nearly broke Caleb's heart. Not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming joy of witnessing his son's spirit flourish. The ache of the past, the silence, the absence, the grief, hadn't vanished, but it had been softened by something stronger: presence, purpose, and love. They walked back toward the small amphitheater, where folding chairs dotted the grass for the foundation's launch ceremony. A banner hung between two cedar posts. The Isabella Cruz Environmental Foundation. For Earth, for justice, for her. Guests from around the state had gathered. Activists, scientists, lawmakers, and friends. But Caleb barely registered the crowd. His focus remained on Liam, who had insisted on speaking during the dedication. The boy fidgeted with a note card in his hands. "Nervous?" Caleb asked. Liam shrugged. "A little." "You know what helps?" Caleb said, crouching beside him. "Picture Mom right here, sitting in the front row, smiling like she always did when you spoke." Liam's eyes welled up slightly. She always clapped loud. "The loudest," Caleb said with a soft smile. They took their seats as the host welcomed the crowd. When Liam's name was called, the boy walked up slowly, shoulders straight, heart thundering. "My name is Liam Cruz Monroe," he began, his voice steady but tender. And this place is named after my mom. She loved the earth. She used to say that taking care of it was like taking care of family, 'cause everything is connected, even if you don't always see it." He paused, scanning the quiet crowd. "My mom died when I was little," he continued, "but I still remember her voice, her hugs, the way she smelled like lavender and dirt. I remember her saying that people should stand up when something is wrong, even if they stand alone." There were sniffles in the audience now. This place is for her, but it's also for anyone who's ever been told their voice doesn't matter. It does. It always does. The applause was thunderous, but Caleb, standing in the back, didn't move. He couldn't. Pride held him motionless, wrapped in gratitude for a boy who had endured more than most, and for a woman whose light still guided them both. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in strokes of gold and indigo, Caleb and Liam sat on the porch of their new home, a modest ranch-style house built near the preserve's edge. Not far, but a world away from the steel and glass fortress Caleb once called home. "I miss her," Liam said quietly, leaning against his father. "I do too," Caleb replied, his voice barely above a whisper. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that says everything words cannot. Then Caleb reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a bound journal, the last one Isabella had kept. He handed it to Liam. "She wrote this for you. I didn't want to give it to you until you were ready." Liam's hands trembled slightly as he opened the cover. On the inside flap, written in Isabella's looping handwriting, were the words, "To my son, my heart, may you grow strong enough to carry your truth and kind enough to carry others." Liam clutched the book to his chest. "Can we read it together?" he asked. Caleb wrapped an arm around him. "Always." In the months that followed, the foundation flourished. Environmental reforms gained traction in state legislature, backed by passionate youth and Caleb's newly realigned resources. Former employees came forward with praise for Caleb's transparency. Monroe Energy, once a symbol of extraction, pivoted toward sustainability, starting with full funding of solar initiatives in underserved Texas schools. But none of that compared to the quiet victories. Liam's grades improved. He made friends. He started drawing again, sketches of forests, animals, and his mom. Caleb began writing too, letters to Isabella, which he never sent but needed to say. Therapy sessions turned from grief into growth. And weekends were sacred, spent hiking, building tree houses, or simply listening to the wind whisper through branches they'd planted together. And Derek Slater? He became a footnote, a shadow behind bars whose name faded with time. One Saturday, as spring rolled in like a soft tide, Liam asked Caleb, "Do you think she sees us?" Caleb looked up at the sky, the clouds soft and endless above them. "I think she sees everything she hoped for," he said, "and I think she's proud." Liam smiled, leaned into his father's side and let the silence wrap around them like a promise. They didn't need to say more. The future was already speaking. And it sounded like healing.